What up, sports fans? Waxon Wednesday, Jake Waxman, Ty Level 2 guys talk sports. Let's rock and roll. All right, we're going to talk all about hockey. Not necessarily all the Stanley Cup playoffs, but I want to cover the draft lottery because this has been rolling through my mind, especially who got the first overall pick. For those of you who do not know, I only saw a replay of the lottery and I saw all the numbers, and whoever's number popped up will get the first overall pick. Number 12 comes up, and it turns out who else but the Toronto Maple Leafs have number 12? So the Toronto Maple Leafs, they will have the first overall pick. San Jose has the second, and then I think it's Vancouver, and then Chicago. I know the top four at least. I don't remember like the whole draft order, but I do remember that Toronto has the first overall pick. First of all, congrats Toronto. I mean, they had a bit of a down season. They were bottom five in the NHL standings. And I will say this, okay? Happy they got the first pick, and they're probably going to likely get Gavin McKenna, who is the biggest prospect in this year's NHL draft, and the guy who could probably start right away and make a difference. You get him, pair him up with Austin Matthews, and the Maple Leafs could be back to the Maple Leafs could be going back to the way they were with Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner on the team. But also, there's a large amount of fans that aren't happy. And, okay, I will say this. While I'm happy Toronto got the first pick, admittedly, this is not a good look for the NHL. Now, Toronto, they did have a down year, but it's not like they were but as far as I know, they weren't bottom three in the league. They might have been bottom four at most. And I think they had the fifth highest odds to get the number one overall pick. But I can also kind of understand why some people are really frustrated and calling the draft lottery. Once again, this is another one of those draft lotteries that fuels the conspiracy theory that the draft lottery in the NHL is about as rigged as they get. Because you got a team like, and even this is even coming from a Chicago Blackhawks fan. Okay, my team got the number one pick in 2023, which ended up being Connor Bedard, and honestly, I could see why, and people were upset about that back then, like the Blackhawks. But it just seems like, I can understand why people are upset. It just seems like the good talent, when we have a great prospect ends up it's very likely that a great prospect is going to end up going to a huge NHL market. And in this case, in the case of Gavin McKenna, it's very likely going to be Toronto. All right. Bedard ended up in Chicago, another big market. San Jose might be the rare exception here with, of course, that was Macklin Celebrini, very, very great hockey player right now. And San Jose is kind of a smaller market, but it's also in those smaller markets and out west where Gary Bettman likes to basically loves to promote those smaller hockey markets, especially out west. Look, okay, at this time, here's the thing that really gets me, and here's what gets a lot of conspiracy theorists who believe that the draft lottery is rigged. Sorry, guys, I'm sputtering. San Jose, who actually San Jose just barely missed the playoffs this year. How about this? They get the number 2 pick. Okay, that is folks, sports fans, nothing against the San Jose Sharks, but that's a little sus. Like, a team that just barely missed the playoffs is getting the number 2 pick. Now, if they had traded to get that number 2 pick, okay, makes a lot more sense, but they just got it, and they're going to get a pretty nice piece, too. There's another guy out there, I can't remember his name, but 2 really good pieces in this NHL draft. So, once again, another NHL lottery come and gone, and fans continue to be in uproars about it. Like, really. Gavin McKenna, very likely going to the Toronto Maple Leafs. I can on one hand, happy for the Maple Leafs, but I can understand why the fans are ticked. Because here's the thing, the NHL's headquarters, including the Hockey Hall of Fame, it's out in Toronto. Toronto of all places. So, this is not the best look for the NHL. Okay? And hopefully Gavin McKenna does well in Toronto. Presuming, of course, he gets drafted by the Maple Leafs. It would shock me if he's not. But you have moments like this where, and the team I feel really, worst for is Vancouver. All right, and Vancouver, they're one of Chicago's big rivals, but I feel bad for the Vancouver Canucks. They've been trying as hard as they can to build a Stanley Cup winning team. They got a chance for things to go right for them, and they end up getting the 3rd overall pick. Pretty much no chance to get Gavin McKenna. So, I feel really, really bad for a team like Vancouver. You're hoping that the breaks finally go your way, and things like this happen. And keep in mind, Vancouver had the highest odds to get the number 1 pick and still didn't end up with it. Okay. So, you guys are probably wondering, Mr. Waxman, do you believe the NHL lottery is rigged? Do you believe that it's rigged? And honestly, I'm just gonna say, yeah, I do believe it is rigged. There's just something sus about it. I think we kind of need to change up the lottery, and I think we need to make it so the race for the number 1 overall pick is down to the bottom 3 teams. Like teams like Vancouver, like a team like Toronto shouldn't, at least in this case, this year, they should not. I don't think they should. They should have had a chance to get a high pick, but not the number 1 overall pick. Because if I remember correctly, they were not one of the worst 3 teams this year. Maybe one of the bottom 4, but the fact that they ended up with the number 1 overall pick. Here's the thing: regardless of it, okay, and forgive me if I've said some things wrong, but even if Toronto was a bottom 3 team, or excuse me, I'm gonna look something up real quick. NHL standings. Let's see. I'm gonna make sure I get this right, sports fans, just for you. So, Toronto was at the bottom of the Atlantic Division. All right. So the amount of points that they had was 78. So Rangers had 77, and then you got the Blackhawks with 72. So here's the thing, and Vancouver had just 58 points. So the number 1 overall pick should have either been Vancouver or Chicago or the Rangers. It should not have been the Leafs. Here's the thing, the number 1 overall pick should be going to a team that was bottom 3. That's just my take on it. I think that's a change we need to make to the lottery system. I understand why the NHL does a lottery system. We do not want. The last thing that NHL fans want is teams tanking to get the number 1 pick, and the NHL doesn't want that. But it should be. But if we're gonna do it, lottery for the number 1 pick, it should be between the bottom 3 teams. Toronto, no disrespect to Toronto, but they weren't one of the bottom 3. They were one of the bottom 4, but not bottom 3. They should not have had a chance to get the number 1 pick. And of course, based on the fact that everything NHL headquarters, Hockey Hall of Fame, all that stuff is out in Toronto, and the reviews come from Toronto, this comes off as sus. All right, that's about all I'm gonna say. Of course, I have no proof of it. I do believe the NHL Draft Lottery is rigged, but I simply cannot prove it. Simple as that. There are instances there's years where it seems more suspect than others. To conclude this, but congrats to Toronto on getting the number 1 pick, and Vancouver, I feel your pain. And also, I think a team that just missed the playoffs should not have a shot at getting a top 3 pick. A team that just barely missed the playoffs, they should not. If the Blackhawks had a year where they just barely missed the playoffs, they shouldn't be having a shot to get a top 3 pick. That's just me. So I think some changes need to be. I'm still okay with having a draft lottery, but some things need to change. Simple as that. And speaking of the Blackhawks, so I mentioned they're going to have the number 4 pick in the NHL draft. A lot of Blackhawks fans are not happy. They're so ticked. Blackhawks fans are crying, we got screwed. We got hosed. Number 4, that's crazy pick. But you know what? Here's my thoughts on it. All right, so we didn't get a top 3 pick. But you know what? The Blackhawks shouldn't be in this position. They should never have been in this position where we were tanking in the first place or trying to get a top 3 pick. This season, of course, some people say, we weren't going to make the playoffs, and I didn't expect the Blackhawks to make the playoffs, but the Blackhawks should have done a lot better than having their hearts ripped out for a top 3 pick. All right, this should not have been a season where we should have been tanking for at the very least a top 3 pick. This is a season where the Blackhawks should have been stepping up, but that just didn't happen. They should not have been bottom of the league in my take, but here we are again. That's just my thoughts on it. Like, you know what? This tanking thing, it's not working for the Blackhawks. It's not. We need to start improving. Year 4. You know what? Jeff Blashill, the new coach of the Blackhawks, he said it best. We're not doing this again. It's play. For me, here's the thing. For the Blackhawks, they say it's playoffs or bust. For me personally, I need to see the improvement. I need to see us, having a chance to win meaningful games going into that late stretch in March and April that puts us in position to make the playoffs, even if we don't make it. Like, if the Blackhawks don't make the playoffs, gotta come close at the very least. No excuses. Next year, there needs to be significant improvement. This team needs to be, contending at the very least for a playoff spot, if not making it, or at least in finding ways to win games to put themselves in the hunt for a playoff spot. That could have happened this year, and it just didn't. But next season, no excuses. All right? Just cry all you want about not getting a top 3 pick. The Blackhawks should not be here anymore. The NHL, and the NHL, okay, they're not always going to reward us for doing this bad, okay? That's just how it works. Some teams get screwed harder than others, say what you will about it, but this Blackhawks team should not have been in a position where they were tanking. All right, and even, I don't know for sure if they were tanking or not, but if they were, it clearly blew up in the Blackhawks' face. They ended up with the 4th pick, but next year, this upcoming season, I do not want to be thinking about tanking for another pick. We need to be finding a way to win meaningful games and put ourselves in the hunt for a playoff spot, if not making the playoffs. If the Blackhawks aren't doing that next season, Kyle Davidson needs to go then. He needs to be fired. And people are already calling for his job. But if I'm Kyle Davidson, though, I'm willing to give him a chance. Because I know sometimes rebuilds take longer than expected. But here's what the Blackhawks need to do. With that 4th overall pick, 2 options. You either trade up and try to go for number 1 or number 2. And if that don't work, trade down. Enough of this going for prospect stuff. If you think there's I guess I wouldn't have too much of a problem if they get the best possible prospect at number 4, but I would be trading down. Or if I'm the Blackhawks, I would look into trading that number 4 pick to get a proven defenseman. Someone in free agency, perhaps, or even a proven forward. The Blackhawks, they need to improve on defense because last season, this defense was one of the big reasons why the Blackhawks fell apart in December. Injuries, of course. Spencer Knight's a great goaltender, but the defense left him hung out to dry too many times. And the backup goaltender, okay, Arvid Soderblom showed some improvement, but I don't know if he's really an NHL caliber goalie. But the more important thing is the defense needs to improve. Need a little more firepower on offense, mainly from the forwards. Centers, I think the Blackhawks are good with. There's good pieces on offense for the Blackhawks. I'm not worried about the offense. But if I'm the Blackhawks, trade that 4th pick if you can. Try to get an NHL caliber defenseman on a good one. We need defense. Simple as that. I just don't. Otherwise, I don't know what else to do if you're the Blackhawks. But they gotta start improving. And one of the ways they can do that is try and get a proven defenseman in free agency or through a trade. Something like that. Point is that defense needs a lot. The Blackhawks defense needs a lot of help. I don't. And Kyle Davidson, aside from getting Connor Bedard, the track record's looking a little iffy. Artem Lezhinov, I got concerns about. I'm not ready to write him off yet, but I've got concerns. Anton Frondel, time will tell. I like what I see from him, but time will tell. And then other prospects, same thing, time will tell. But there's some good prospects on this team. I like Oliver Moore and Nick Lardis. There's good prospects on this team and good veterans, Tyler Bertuzzi and, of course, Brian Donato. There's good pieces on this Blackhawks team. There's no excuse for this team to finish bottom of the league 4 years in a row. 3 years in a row is also too many. Because here's the thing. I don't want to waste Connor Bedard's career. I don't want the Blackhawks to waste Connor Bedard's career. And right now, whether or not he stays in Chicago for the long term, or if it's just a short extension, it may come down to what the Blackhawks do in this draft. They got to play it smart. Either trade up, trade down, like try to get as close to number one as possible, or trade down the pick, or trade the pick away and try to get an elite defenseman, an NHL caliber defenseman. That's what the Blackhawks need more than anything else. Someone who can lead the way on defense. I'd also be okay with a forward, too, who can score goals. Bottom line is, the Blackhawks have some needs, but the biggest need is on defense. And right now, that seat's got to be mighty warm for Kyle Davidson. And being that the Blackhawks got the 4 pick, it looks like this whole tanking thing and rebuild, there's some questions, to say the least. All right, speaking of the Stanley Cup playoffs, so here's what I find fascinating. So, congratulations to Montreal. Beat the Bolts in 7. Won that series in 7 games. Game ended 2-1 in favor of the Montreal Canadiens. They lost to the Sabres earlier today, 4-2. How about this, sports fans? You can't make this up. Talk about one of the most cringiest ways to win games. Nothing again. The biggest takeaway that I have from the series, Montreal's defense deserves a lot of credit. They absolutely do. They won Game 7 2-1. And how about this? They won 2-1 against the Bolts, despite only having 9 shots on goal. I'm not making this up. The Canadiens had just 9 shots on goal in Game 7, and they won 2-1. They scored on 2 of those 9 shots. Crazy stuff. Literal. Like, Tampa had, I think 3 times as many, at the very least 3 times as many shots as Montreal, and lost the game. Goaltending and defense deserve a lot of credit for Montreal. Without them, Montreal would probably have been knocked out sooner. But it goes to show you got to have good goaltending to win in this series. When you have that and a good defense, you can win despite having 9 shots on goal. But, I mean, I'm giving the Canadiens grief for that, but they still won. That's what matters. They still found a way to win. Sometimes hockey doesn't make sense. I love the game of hockey, my favorite sport. Sometimes even my favorite sport just does not make sense. It just boggles the mind. Boggles my mind how Montreal could win a Game 7 with just 9 shots on goal. But aside from the fact of good goaltending, it's about all I can say about that. What a crazy series. Congrats to Montreal once again. And if they get that great goaltending again against Buffalo, they'll have a chance. I don't know if they'll have a chance to win the Cup. I just don't think they have enough firepower, but they can go 7 games with anyone when their defense is playing at their best and the offense provides enough firepower. On to this day in sports history, and on this day, the 6th of May in the year 1773. We're going way back, sports fans. On this day, May the 6th, 1773, first international boxing match. Local fighter Bob Whittaker beats the Venetian gondolier Tito Di Carni at James Figg's Academy Amphitheatre at Marylebone, London. So for the record, boxing goes way back. Just learned that today. All right, sports fans, that's all I got for this week's Waxon Wednesday. I hope you've enjoyed it. And me and Tom Lavalette, we will see you on Friday for another Friday Roundtable. For now, though, this is Jake Waxman from Two Guys Talk Sports, wishing you all a good week.